All right, good afternoon. I'm Marissa McCoy. I'm the VP for Diversity Affairs for the Lexington-Concord chapter. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a really exciting speaker lined up as part of our diversity speaker series. And I'm going to actually pass it over to Pat Hamilton, who's our VP of Programs, to kick us off and provide introductions.
Hey, thanks, Marissa. Hey, everybody, Pat Hamilton, and from today's speaking event sponsor, Booz Allen. I'm very thrilled to welcome and introduce Mr. Johnathan Holifield. Through his presidential appointment, Mr. Holifield has served the executive director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and has been an advisor on the White House Domestic Policy Council since October 2017. Mr. Holifield's a co-founder of Scale Up Partners LLC and an author for Future Economy and Inclusive Competitiveness of How Demographic Trends and Innovation Can Create Shared Prosperity for All Americans. Advising the President of the United States and a series of political appointees, Mr. Holifield's worked throughout the administration.
Pat, I think we lost audio. Pat, can you hear me?
Just before I turn over to you, sir, reminder to everyone attending, we try to make this a free-flowing conversation, so use the chat questions and I'll kind of moderate and bounce things over. So please feel free to use the chat and question boxes to reach out as Mr. Holifield's going through. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Pat. And we had a bit of a technical glitch. So the glorious words that you used to describe me, I miss them. So, but thank you for inviting me to join you this afternoon. It's an exciting time for HBCU, and it's a privilege to address you all on the White House Initiative on HBCU and exploring how HBCU can help meet agency and other missions throughout the federal government as well as in the private sector. Let's begin. Next slide. Keeping on through. The White House Initiative on HBCU is established by Executive Order 13779. These executive orders go back to August 8th of 1980. President Carter is the first to issue an HBCU executive order, but as you can imagine, it was in the final quarter or so of his administration. So the initiative really didn't get off the ground until President Reagan revoked President Carter's executive order and issued his own, reestablishing the initiative. It's important to note that each president since President Carter has revoked his predecessors and reissued or issued his own executive order supporting HBCU. The initiative is led by an executive director, me, designated by the president. It is housed in the Executive Office of the President, physically located at both the Department of Education as well as the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Operationally, we're a bit of an anomaly. Operationally, we are also in the Department of Education, where we have a small team of 4 career employees, and we work across the federal government and in the private sector. Think of us a bit like a skunk works operation, a small team outside the day-to-day programmatic work of federal agencies and working across federal agencies and in the private sector. Next slide, please. All right, our watchword, North Star, is HBCU competitiveness. Now, we know that the term competitiveness has a colloquial definition: show up, compete, try hard, endure, be resilient. All of that applies as well. but the term also has an economic and academic definition. And we've adopted, or rather incorporated, themes from the U.S. Competitiveness Project at Harvard University. That project defines U.S. competitiveness as the ability of American firms to compete in global markets while raising standards of living of the average American. Interestingly, in the last several years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, perhaps since 2009 or so, the last recession that we had, we've seen a redefinition of competitiveness. It used to be purely the ability of American firms to compete in global markets and measure that across the globe to determine a country's competitiveness. Now we see a recoupling, a reconnection to affirm performance on one end and improve standards of living on the other end. We think that is a good development, and we've adopted a similar definition of HBCU competitiveness. We define it as the ability of institutions to compete, successfully compete, for federal and non-federal investment to meet student needs and promote community prosperity. Compete for federal and non-federal investment, meet student needs, and promote community prosperity. An initiative like us, we're a conditions creating function. We steward no grants. We steward no programs. We steward no contracts, except for a contract here or there to do $10,000, $11,000 worth of work. We're not that entity. We're kind of like a skunk works operation, connected to the broader enterprise, but somewhat outside the day-to-day management of programs, contracts, grants, and the like. And we work to accelerate activity throughout the federal and, in many cases, non-federal sector. This leads to, it's an important point, and this distinction is crucial. We are an initiative, not a program. What I've described adds up to an initiative, a discrete thrust, if you will. Think about Newton's first and second laws of motion. First law, matter at rest will remain at rest. Second law is an accelerating, intervening force is needed to move a resting mass into action. That's what we are. We help accelerate an otherwise resting or perhaps slower moving mass into action on HBCU competitiveness. Another metaphorical way to describe our work is trim tab kind of action. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our Buckminster Fuller's description of the trim tab. Essentially, it's about turning the big ship. The big ship is the object. The rudder turns the object. Clear about that. But if you got a big object and a big rudder, just trying to steer that big behemoth is super difficult. The trim tab is a small, high leverage rudder for the rudder. Rudder for the rudder. So the initiative is like a trim tab. The ship is the 100 HBCU throughout the nation. The rudder, for our purposes, are largely federal agencies, but also non-federal actors as well. We are the trim tab, a high leverage, a small, high leverage instrument that really works to turn the rudder, federal and non-federal sectors, to ultimately move the ship in the preferred direction, and that ship or object are HBCU. We want to facilitate a dynamic of push out, connect up, pull down. We're intentional about how we define that. Every day, our team, as well as our federal and non-federal partners, are pushing out the top opportunities, the competitiveness levers of our country toward HBCU. That's our number one bucket of work or lane of work, if you will. The Connect Up is improving the quality or the ability of our institutions to reach up and connect up to those sources of top opportunities. The end game is the pull down. No political judgment, not trickle down, but the pull down, where our institutions and their stakeholders, their students, their communities that they serve are able to connect up to, grab hold of, and pull down value from sources of top opportunity. Push out, connect up, pull down. And we organize our work in 3 interrelated lanes. I used to call them buckets, but I got some good coaching from one of the members of the Federal Interagency Working Group. Say, you know, Jonathan, these really sound like interrelated lanes more than discrete, independent buckets of work. And I think that's a good way to think about it. Lane 1 is programs. Those are long-term efforts. Generally, we own them or we work with others on programs. And it's all about how we accelerate and support HBCU competitiveness. Then there are projects. Those are discrete, time-bound efforts that are designed to accelerate in a particular matter an objective related to HBCU competitiveness. Long-term programs sprinkled with targeted, interactive accelerants or boosters that we call projects. And supplementing and complementing that work is our policy work, working with the Executive Office of the President, across the administration, and with our federal partners, developing policy to support HBCU competitiveness. Next slide, please. Yep, scroll on through. All right. Programs. Our programs, thank you, inculcate the HBCU competitiveness narrative. That's our North Star. Almost everything we do inculcates over and over and over that core objective. We are anchored by the Federal HBCU Interagency Working Group. I, per the executive order, chair that group. My colleague at the initiative really is the day-to-day facilitator of the group. Tammy Ferguson does a fantastic job nurturing every day the common interconnected relationships of federal agencies. We also have structured federal HBCU interagency competitiveness clusters. My background is in innovation and competitiveness, economic development, and there's a concept called cluster development, where essentially a group of an economic sector works together to improve not the performance of a particular or a few firms, but for the entire field. And out of that, you nurture connections of small firms and large firms and broader policy to support the entire industry. Well, we've taken that same concept and applied that to HBCU interagency competitiveness clusters. And we have about 9 or so to date, ranging from STEM to Smart HBCU, and coming online a national security cluster that'll be led and facilitated by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. We encourage intra-agency working groups. One of the challenges with this work is so many times HBCU activity is relegated to the coffin corner, if you will, a football reference, the coffin corner of agency opportunity. Well, One way to combat that is to form an intra-agency working group within the agency comprised of different partners throughout the agency to advance HBCU competitiveness. This way, we ensure that HBCU are not only an equal employment opportunity or civil rights or HR, but we're getting into research and development and innovation and all the other kinds of opportunities that our federal sector provides. So we encourage agencies to establish intra-agency working groups to ensure that connectivity. And about 10 or so have done that in the last couple of years. Also, we have recently, last February, we announced the first federal HBCU competitiveness strategy framework. You know, we've been doing this work, and the sector has been doing this work for more than 40 years, but we've never had a federal strategy. Well, we've undertook the policy coordination function to have an interagency process by the Domestic Policy Council that I led that developed the framework. And why we provide a framework is we needed to provide guardrails. We provide the process, the agencies themselves provide the content to fill the strategy. The strategy is in the final phases, and it'll be issued in the next week or so, we hope. We've also developed agency guidance, ideas we have about how agencies can strengthen the framework in their own HBCU competitiveness strategies. And again, the federal strategy should issue in the next couple of weeks for sure. Next slide. Yeah, punch on through, thank you. All right, we steward the National HBCU Week Conference, all in collaboration with our federal agency partners and in the private sectors. It is the premier gathering of HBCU, and frankly, the largest gathering outside of sports events for the field. And we've dramatically increased participation in the last couple of years over historic performance. And this year we successfully pivoted to a 100% online platform. Excellent leadership from our team, as well as great content, great engagement, thoughtful engagement from our myriad federal and non-federal partners. We have HBCU Competitiveness Scholars, where we honor, recognize students from HBCU nominated by their presidents or chancellors who exhibit academic achievement, campus or civic involvement, and importantly, entrepreneurial ethos, or that go-getter spirit. We want to recognize those who not do well in school, involved in the community or their campus. But underneath all of that is that go-getter entrepreneurial ethos, the constant pursuit beyond the four corners of resource that one controls. We instituted the Excellence in Innovation and Competitiveness Awards to recognize agency partners for outstanding contributions to the initiative and the broader HBCU field. We provide management of the President's Board of Advisors on HBCU. Our designated federal official does an excellent job, and we have put together robust agendas for that advisory group on behalf of the President. And we, of course, work closely with the U.S. Department of Education on HBCU specific programs. Next slide. All right. Projects, again, keep in mind, these are shorter term interventions designed to accelerate achieving an objective in a particular four-corner area. Through the interagency competitiveness clusters, we deliver most of the projects. We have very active clusters across the board, and our role is to be the platform, the facilitator, convening, enabler of those with resources, i.e. our federal and non-federal partners, to do their best work. Just as a side note, we try at the initiative to exhibit and project a culture where folks want to work with us. I often describe us as all carrot and no stick. In other words, we're all opportunity and no ability to make anyone do anything. We have to lead by influence, persuasion, begging sometimes, but we really are all carrot and no stick. Next slide. All right, policy. Engagement with federal and non-federal partners. I mean, we work with everyone. We work with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Council of Economic Advisors. I serve on the Domestic Policy Council. We work with the Office of American Innovation. And then we work across states. We've held convenings, 10 or 12 regional convenings of public and private partners to really replicate what we're doing at the federal level at the state and local level. There's a lot of value to replicating what we're doing in DC in the various states and regions where our institutions are located. We help it identify HBCU priorities and embed them within administration priority. We work to strengthen federal agency planning, goaling, measuring, and reporting, all to strengthen the federal contribution to and with HBCU. Here's an important point that we've worked hard to achieve. A nuance to how we talk about HBCU, and that nuance is at least twofold. First, we always talk about our institutions as being national treasures, and they are that, absolutely. But they're more than that. Let's look at language very briefly. Typically, national treasures are preserved for posterity. A worthy endeavor indeed. However, we invest in assets with an expectation that they grow and provide a greater return to the investor. In other words, thinking about our institutions and the field not only as national treasures worthy of preservation, but as national assets worthy of investment with the expectation that they will continue to provide a disproportionately high or good return to the nation. So that's one iteration. And that really manifests in another iteration. And that is our language around federal activity with HBCU. So much of the narrative is how the federal government can support HBCU. Again, a worthy advocacy point, no doubt. However, the number of employees in the federal government that actually have day-to-day responsibility for working with HBCU, I mean, it's in their job description, are very few. I mean, very few. Okay? So we think the better position is not how folks who are not, quote, paid to deliver value to HBCU, but rather how we can connect the value of HBCU to the work that they're charged with delivering. In other words, how our institutions can help meet federal objectives, missions, agency missions as well. So it's a nuanced way of talking about it, but we think it'll add more value, aligning our institutions with the day-to-day work. Professionals across the federal government are evaluated and judged upon and are aligned with the strategic priorities of the federal sector. And over-the-top, easy example that I've used in the past is apropos now. Let's take Johns Hopkins University, the #1 by far academic research engine in terms of amount of research funding in the United States. They might be up to $2.5 billion a year. Well, a lot of that is federal. And the federal government doesn't work to meet Johns Hopkins needs or to strengthen Johns Hopkins through these research and development investments. Rather, Johns Hopkins has proven to be indispensable to the nation's research and investment needs. Similarly, we want to position our institutions, if not indispensable, certainly of help, tremendous help meeting federal objectives. Next slide, please. Some more of our policy leadership, providing vision and action to the President's Board of Advisors, and also the HBCU Capital Financing Program. The Capital Financing Program really provides great rates, better rates, far better rates for capital development loans for HBCU, far better rates than the market. And there's an advisory group for that entity at the Department of Education, and we support that as well. We participate in all kinds of policy coordination councils, summits, and public-private sector programs. And again, we inform the administration and the Department of Education of insights and intelligence gleaned from the HBCU field. Next slide, please. All right, how you can help. Things to think about. Open HBCU outreach and engagement functions within your organizations. If you're a federal employee, connect with your HBCU representatives. If not, form an HBCU intra-agency working group or organization within your company as well. Amplify. In grant making and contracting processes, HBCU focused boilerplate. Not that they have to be just for HBCU, but in this field and many underserved communities, unless they are specifically called out in an opportunity, i.e., HBCU are encouraged to compete for this opportunity. Explicitly, informed by experience, many in underserved communities and certainly HBCU will tend to look past the opportunity. So boilerplate can have a positive impact in getting more HBCU and their students to participate in whatever grant or contract opportunities your entity might have. We say support the federal HBCU competitiveness strategy. Again, it is North Star guidance for federal priorities for non-federal actors as well. And we need private partners to improve the quality of the Connect Up. That's where we need more, the field needs more and more partners to improve the Connect Up. Digress for a moment, informed by my own background. When I was in economic development in, let's say, Cincinnati, for example, I was the founding executive director of an innovation-based intermediary called Cincy Tech. And this was in the early 2000s, to give away my age, right? And whenever a big company or the city or county or the state of Ohio or the federal government or national philanthropy were pushing out an opportunity around innovation and technology-based economic development, people like me are asking 3 questions, and they can be captured in the initials AOL. Now, those of you who are of my age, we remember America Online, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about aggregate, organized, leverage. Whatever opportunities are pushed out, folks like me on the ground will ask, who do I need to aggregate? How efficiently can we organize? And how can we best leverage one another to pull down a disproportionate amount of this value to this community? The point I want to make in how you can help improve the quality of the Connect Up, that initial question, who do I need to aggregate? Who and what do I need to aggregate? Essentially, that question is answered by, I need to aggregate the competitive advantages that exist in my area. So many times, HBCU are not viewed by the economic development and other sources of opportunity as providing unique competitive advantages for the regions in which they sit. So they're not brought into the partnership. And so it is hard to improve the quality of the Connect Up without public and private partners. So at the end of the day, if you have an HBCU in your community, particularly, think about them when it's time to compete for opportunities. They can be a distinguishing feature of your grant response or application or your RFP, etc. They are, and they provide competitive advantages. Think about it this way. Only 19 states even have an HBCU. So 31 states in our nation don't have this particular asset. So its presence can be viewed as something that not every state has. So it's unique to these 19, and we think they offer unique competitive advantages to become better conduits to attract greater investment, both federal and non-federal, public and private, into communities to support those communities. And finally, think about the 2021 National HBCU Week Conference. It's a long-term program of the initiative in collaboration with the Department of Education and the Executive Office of the President. And hopefully we're back to some semblance of normalcy by then. And so it will be an in-person affair. And many of you are stewards of great content and great opportunities. And this could be a chance for you to engage with the HBCU field. It is the premier national convening of HBCU. And with that, my remarks are concluded. Thank you.
All right, sir. I'll start with a few questions here. One of them, thank you for the run through. I think there's a lot of information, very valuable there. And folks online, feel free to use the chat for questions to kind of facilitate through here. How would you, it's from like a tactical entry point, how could private industry sync up more with HBCUs? Like kind of twofold, like parts on innovation, like areas of innovation, or even internships to students? Like how, kind of what's the entry point outside that from like, the tactical standpoint?
Well, of course, it's the institutions themselves. And if you have the capacity and to do outreach directly to institutions, do that. Also, that's a role that the initiative has. Consider us a point of entry. Reach out to us. We're happy to explore public-private partnerships, how our platform can help you to connect with the HBCU field for student interns and the like. Give you an example. One of our clusters, frankly, our most active is our human capital cluster. We probably have 8 or 10 agencies very actively involved in that cluster. They've held virtual and in-person career fairs and those kinds of things, constantly promoting internship opportunities and the like. So think of us as a point of entry, not the only point of entry, but we certainly are a point of entry. So you can reach out to the White House Initiative at any time and we can help facilitate the connections that you want to make.
And on that, for the reach out for the initiative, is there like a general email, or how would folks reach out just on that point?
Absolutely. WHI_HBCU@ed.gov. And I'll make sure, because I've never given it out, my team does, it's part of our boilerplate, but I'll make sure that, Pat, that you have that,
Okay.
and it's a great outreach to the initiative.
That's why we're keeping you honest, to make sure you know your own web address, sir. You know.
That's right.
You're on your toes.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, that's the last real quiz question we'll give to you. I think one of the questions. Yeah, for setting up, like you mentioned, setting up working groups within the organizations. Could you talk through that a little bit of how that works and a little more on that?
Yeah, straightforward. Probably would need an empowering position or function to enable the work, to provide the imprimatur of leadership, the soft policy or hard policy within your organization or company. VP of this, the CEO, whomever. This is something we want to do. We want to improve our engagement with HBCU. I'd encourage that kind of, in the federal sector, that kind of secretarial or administrator leadership. We have found that that's the #1 enabler of these kinds of groups. They can be accomplished without that kind of enabling, but it is so much easier if you senior, at least one senior person within your organization, quote, authorized its creation. Secondly, as the group comes together, think not only about titles and functions, which is important, but also think about heart. And what I mean by that is, so many times, alumni and others who care deeply about HBCU might not have the right title, but they have the passion and the heart for the institutions. And boy, they will run through walls for you. So, and when you pull that group together, you begin to connect dots and build out a kind of corporate or organizational ecosystem of opportunities where the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, and you get to 1 and 1 is 3 kind of exponential impacts as well. Keep this stuff simple. You don't have to go over the top with complication, but you do need an enabler, you do need a platform, and the kind of talent are both titles as well as the heart for the work.
All right, and sir, one more. You talked about STEM initiatives. Could you elaborate a little more on STEM initiatives and kind of a little more on that topic specifically, if you could? Absolutely.
The STEM cluster has just come together in the last couple of months, and as a group has not had nearly the history of some of the more mature clusters. But how I've advised and encouraged the cluster to come together is STEM not only to get jobs, but STEM in terms of job creation. And a mature narrative in our nation is the importance of STEM to compete for top employment opportunities as well. So within your agency or organization, we can help you plus your outreach. If you want to do something specifically for your agency alone, we can help. If you want to explore collaborative opportunities with other agencies, we can help. But we also encourage our federal and non-federal partners to think about STEM's role in higher growth entrepreneurship. One of the gaps in the population principally, not exclusively, but principally served by HBCU is the absence of job creating enterprises. There's a lot of entrepreneurial activity, particularly over the last 20 years. We've seen exponential, explosive growth in the number of businesses created, but we still haven't seen the commensurate, equitable levels of job creation. For example, I think we're up to, for Black-owned businesses, for example, I think we're up to 2.6 million Black-owned businesses in the United States. 2.5 million don't have employees. One of the reasons, not the only, but a significant reason, is the misalignment of enterprise creation and entrepreneurship from the competitive and growth sectors of our economy, many of which are anchored, grounded in STEM. So the encouragement that I provided our cluster as it figures out its program of work is think about STEM not only as a pathway to win great employment opportunities, without question, but also how STEM nurtures innovation and higher growth, job creating entrepreneurship in the sectors that are most important to the overall economic health of our nation. So that's an early cluster activity, but I'd encourage anyone who's thinking about STEM to think about it in the two or the dual pipelines of US competitiveness. STEM's role in producing higher value employees and higher growth entrepreneurs.
And so we have another question in the chat here. So I assume this is relating to contract authority. So is the DoD using HBCU set-aside authority since the program has started to contract directly to HBCU organizations?
You know, that is a great question, and I'm not sure, and I'll tell you why. Because it really informs a bigger question around HBCU. One of the advocacy points that we continue to emphasize is that when it comes to federal action, the H is more important than the B. And this is what we mean. If they were BCUs, Black colleges and universities, then it would obviously mean they were race-based institutions. It would obviously mean that this was infringing upon a constitutionally guaranteed right. It would mean that it would impact a suspect classification. It would mean that federal efforts in support or working with these institutions would be viewed under the highest judicial standard of strict scrutiny. We are often treated like BCUs, but we are HBCUs. And the H keeps us out of strict scrutiny. H keeps us out of the purview of suspect classification. The H opens up all manner of federal action for consideration for how it can be deployed to HBCU. At the Department of Defense, my own understanding, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, is that that's been a discussion point since I've been in this position, that we don't have to treat these institutions like BCUs, and all of the tools that are available, set-asides, competitive preferences, and the like, are not legally problematic when applied to HBCUs, because HBCUs are defined as three things: founded before 1964, principally, not exclusively, principally to educate Black Americans, and accredited. There are no percentages associated with the definition of HBCU. For example, for MSIs or minority serving institutions, or predominantly Black institutions, or HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, and the like. There are percentages tied. An institution that has X percentage of this number of students can be a certain thing. HBCU has none of that. So it's a long-winded way of making what I think is an important point. When it comes to federal action, the H is more important than the B. Now, the B provides the historic flavor, the experience of Black people in America, but we are HBCUs and not BCUs. So the question is broader than the Department of Defense. It goes to federal action at all. And we've had some breakthrough and some recognition that the H is more important than the B for federal action. So that's, again, a long-winded answer, and I hope I helped with an understanding.
No, that's good, sir. Thank you. And I'll do a last call. Anyone else in the chat? Any follow-on questions? Just give it a second here. If not, sir, I'll turn over to you. Any closing remarks? I want to thank you on behalf of the chapter, first off, for coming, speaking with everyone today, and your leadership and how you walked us through kind of this topic and the initiatives you have ongoing. So I think everyone, we really thank everyone for, oh, I think there was another question. Oh, hold on, we might have another question going. Go through. It might be a question that I can't see if you want to funnel through. Someone on the line, if it was. Okay. I think one more question. Hold on. Another question. Okay. All right. I think let one more question come in, sir. So we'd like to. So the question is, we'd like to understand if HBCUs are also a way to ensure we have access to mid-career URMs. What are organizations to ensure we reach out to the most diverse workforce?
Well, yes. And the reason why I struggled a bit is the predominant profile of HBCU students are younger, early, pre-career kinds of talent. But increasingly, I do sense that more and more institutions are building out the kind of graduate and lifelong learning capabilities that are needed in the nation. So I would say absolutely yes. They're a source for not only pre and entry level employees from the existing students and recent graduates, but I think increasingly they will be a greater contributor to the professional development and lifelong learning needs of many more as well. So in a nutshell, yes. And if we could be of help, we're happy to explore with you how.
All right, sir. I got some more that are flooded in. So I I'll give you one. I work for the government and I went to an HBCU. How can I get involved with this program?
Well, first off, we're not a program. We're an initiative. And whatever agency that you're in, they likely, because we have our interagency working group is comprised of 34 federal agencies, the most we've ever had with our interagency working group. So likely you do have a liaison appointed by your secretary or administrator and representatives. Those are the worker bees in our interagency working group. The liaisons are senior officials who report directly to the secretary or administrator on progress with HBCU activities. We get some regular engagement from a few of them, but the real worker bees are representatives. I'm happy to make available, and you can go to our website and get the directory and find your agency and your members of your agency that are involved in the HBCU interagency working group. Or when I get the right email to Pat, and he'll make sure you all have it, you can reach out to the initiative and we can provide whatever information you need. Are we still connected?
Pat, are you still there?
So that they're on the same playing field as the institutions. So, you know, go ahead.
I was not able to hear your question.
Oh, all right. I'll try this again. I work in the tech and research sector. One of the biggest issues we're struggling with is that the HBCUs are well behind the tier 1 research institutes. Many of the tier 1 research institutes obtain their status through government funding. However, we don't see the same funding going through HBCUs. What will it take to level the playing field?
It will take people like you and your companies and organizations to work collaboratively with the institutions to improve their ability to connect up and pull down these resources. Even in the tier 1 institutions or research ones, I can't forget the exact description on the Carnegie rankings now, they extensively work with private sector partners to improve the quality of their research and grant proposals. So we would say the government, as we know, are supposed to steward taxpayer resources, no doubt. However, the private sector can be tremendous partners with institutions to improve the quality of their grant and other proposals, to provide investment to institutions beyond scholarships, but in terms of infrastructure. You opened another consideration. The level set is all the work we do in this space is hard. Now, having said that, the less difficult among hard work is scholarship support. It's all hard, but that's the least difficult among the hard work. The more difficult work, the most difficult work is providing finding the kind of investment to improve infrastructure, to improve the infrastructure for research, to provide faculty and curricular development. Those kinds of institutional capacity building resources are tough. And the private sector can be a tremendous partner in improving beyond scholarships, internships, thumbs up, but also building out helping to build out the institution's capacity to better meet private sector as well as federal opportunities as well. That is hard. Those are hard resources to find.
And sir, one of the questions is, what's the tentative dates for the 2021 HBCU week? I know that's another trivia question for you, but we can put that out in a note with the link.
I can tell you the month will be in September of 2020. And we actually do have the dates, and I'll make sure Pat has them and he can share them with the team.
All right. And I know we're coming up to the final minutes here. Go ahead.
I have
Sure.
3 things I'm going to get to you, Pat. 1, make sure you have the correct address for the initiative. Secondly, the dates for the conference. And third, a link to our federal agency directory so those can see with who their point of contact within their agency for the initiative.
Okay. And sir, you know, the questions are coming in fast and furious, so you gauge a lot of interest in today's conversation. And I'll go with the last question here. Howard has a digital transformation center. How's the government partnering with this initiative?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. And I'm going to push back with the question. I'm going to push back modestly with the question. It's not a great question. Question should be, how is Howard partnering with the federal government to support, and how that effort can deliver value to the federal government? That's the better question.
All right. I think we're coming up to the top of the hour here. I think there's a few kind of corresponding questions, but we'll try and close on time. I appreciate everyone in attendance today. I think we had lively questions like towards the end, and I appreciate Mr. Holifield for the great conversation today. Any closing words, sir, before we do one more admin slide at the end?
Just thank you very much for the enthusiastic engagement, the thoughtful engagement, this dialogue and the opportunity to connect dots in new ways. I owe Pat a couple of things, and I hope that you all will continue to work with the HBCU initiative, as well as with and through your agencies or private sector actors. We welcome opportunities to support.
Okay. Thank you, sir. The chapter appreciates you speaking today. Marissa, I'll turn it over to you just to go over the last events coming up for our next speakers.
Sure. Yep. And I just also wanted to echo Mr. Holifield that we appreciate you taking the time to join us. It was interesting to hear about the HBCU initiatives and priorities. And I think the big takeaway is, what can we do to help? So you've really dangled that carrot in front of us. And so now it's just a matter of us going after it. So thank you.
You're welcome, and it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Marissa.
Yes, and thanks to everyone who was able to join us today. So we have several upcoming events that we hope that you can join. The first one up is the virtual Santa Claus on Monday. So it should be a fun event for the kiddos and probably the adults alike. And then in January, we do have State of AFCEA with Lieutenant General Sean Morris. And then in January, we have Ms. Caroline Malot talking on disability as a driver of innovation. So that should be a really interactive session that we hope you can join. And then Mr. Jimmy Smith will also be speaking in February, and he is the director of the Office of Small Business Programs at the Department of the Navy. So we have a lot of exciting upcoming events. You can check out all these events on our website that's listed there, and you can register there. So we look forward to seeing you at the coming events, and thank you again for joining us today.